We receive a lot of calls about property rights in Texas, specifically those dealing with oil and gas. As just a general rule, most of us heard that there are two types of land rights in Texas. One is for the surface, and the other is for minerals or oil and gas. Those two types of rights really do differ, and they differ in important ways. Perhaps the most important thing for most of us to know is that for the most part, Texas is an oil and gas production state, and therefore the mineral rights or the oil and gas rights will be superior to the surface rights. As a practical matter, what does that mean? That means if I don't own the mineral rights, I really can't prevent an oil and gas company from coming out to drill a well on my property. It's a scary thought. That's why for a lot of people, making sure to obtain the mineral rights, or at least some control over the mineral rights, is incredibly important when buying property. Now, there are certain guidelines that can't be violated. There are certain foot restrictions within a certain number of feet within a house or a water well. But for the most part, if an oil company wants to drill on your property and you don't own the mineral rights, they can do so long as they have contracted with the actual oil and gas operator. So the important thing to remember is if you don't own the oil and gas rights and an oil and gas company comes to drill on your property, you will have very few rights to be able to stop them. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have no rights. The reality is that an oil and gas company does have to provide you with reasonable compensation for damage to the surface. So that could be for things like damage to a fence, damage to a water well, damage to crops, damage to certainly livestock. But whether or not that's something that's going to be sufficient to keep them from drilling on your property is probably not if they've decided that there is oil and gas on your property. So what can you do? First of all, you need to think about that before you buy property. So how can we prevent these issues from happening? One of the rights that comes with oil and gas is the right of ingress and egress. That is to say, who can come on my property for the purposes of exploring for oil and gas. If I control that, I can prevent any well from being on my property. So that's an incredibly important right to request when you're purchasing property. Even if you're not getting the actual oil and gas rights themselves, that is to say the money that would come from production, if you have the right to prevent them from drilling a well on your property, you've saved yourself a lot of headache. Another typical way of handling this issue is to set up a specified area within your property where drilling can occur. So typically that would be a 5-acre box somewhere on the property where drilling can occur. And that would actually be something that you would include in the documents when you purchase the property. If you didn't do any of those things and you're approached by an oil company about where to put an oil well, you still have some ability to negotiate with them for where the most reasonable placement on your property is. And those are guidelines that are set out in a number of different places, but it's certainly something that we can help you discuss and find out about. So if you have questions about this or anything else that goes with what do I have when I have only the surface rights, please give us a call so that we can set up an appointment to discuss. Thank you.